slides. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll have the honor to introduce our next speaker. So now, we're joined by someone who sits right at the intersection of pediatrics, serious games, and immersive technology. Dr. Kimberly Hieftje is an associate professor at the Yale School of Medicine of Pediatrics and the co-director and co-founder of XR Pediatrics and the Yale Center for Immersive Technologies in Pediatrics. Her research focuses on the development, implementation, and evaluation of extended reality and game-based interventions to improve health outcomes among youth. With over 16 years of experience in health behavior change and child-centered design, Dr. Hieftje has led numerous NIH, CDC, industry, and foundation-funded projects exploring the use of immersive technologies in clinical, educational, and behavioral settings. She's particularly interested in the integration of narrative, spatial audio, and biometric feedback in XR to enhance engagement and impact. Dr. Hieftje has authored more than 60 peer-reviewed publications and book chapters, and served as the editor-in-chief of the Game for Health journal. Dr. Hieftje is a strong advocate for ethical guidelines around youth XR use and is actively engaged in shaping policy and best practices for immersive health integrations. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kimberly Hieftje.
Hi everyone, sorry I had a little switch up here. So you probably, given I work in pediatrics, I'm an associate professor in pediatrics, you probably think I'm going to talk a lot about kids, but I'm actually not. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to talk more about just kind of the things that we do in our lab. Oftentimes we have to start with adults, right? Or oftentimes we're working with families of kids. So not everything we do is focused on kids. So kind of thinking about, yesterday and hearing the panel last night, and I've been thinking a lot about this idea of immersion, right? What it means to be immersed. And so that's kind of where I want to take a lot of the talks, what I'm going to talk about today. And I welcome you guys to all kind of, throw out and be thinking about some of these things about, especially when you think about immersion and what that means to you. Again, I am co-founder, co-director of the XR Pediatrics and also the Yale Center for Immersive Technologies in Pediatrics. We focus on youth-centered immersive tech. If I could go back in time, you can tell we formed the lab first because it's XR Pediatrics, and then we formed the center. And I really like the word immersive technology better, just because as we're kind of the use of the umbrella term extended reality, it shifts and changes, and I think we're moving in different directions, and I think the word immersive tech tends to do better to describe some of the stuff that we're all thinking about and talking about, especially when you bring in AI, right? That doesn't really fit often under extended reality, but it's becoming more and more connected to immersive tech. So we really focus on clinical research, we focus on basic science, and also education and learning and behavior change interventions. So this is what our lab looked when we first got it all set up, but of course it doesn't look like that now. I wanted to make sure it looked realistic. This is just us at our lab. It's a busy, busy lab. It's a lot of fun. I think right now we have about 10 people on our team. And I remember Bruce talking about this last night about, like, you know, at Disney Imagineering, right? The many disciplines that take up a team to do things. And we're very, very small, 10 to 15 people, but we're also we have game designers, we have MDs, we have PhDs, we have we have UX, UI design, we have an art critic, we have a professor of music from the New England Conservatory. We're kind of all over the place, and based on what our needs are, that team grows and expands. And I think that's what has led us to do a lot of fun and great things, is remembering that we don't know everything, and it's important to reach out to the great people that are doing the great work and bring them on board. Like I said, we focus mostly on kids. I think that was our original kind of where we wanted to first start, because we were seeing kids being put in headsets, you know, right away, and companies popping up everywhere, putting kids in VR, and it made us pause, especially, you know, thinking about pediatrics and a department of pediatrics, of like, okay, what does that mean for kids, and what do we need to be thinking about? And you guys all know this, kids are not small adults. And there's things we have to think about when we're creating for kids, or when we're putting kids into immersive tech and headsets. One, their little heads are small. Look over here, we have Joelle. You know, the headset is actually sitting over her nose. The controllers, you can see their little hands, they're not even holding them correctly, nor do they often have the fine motor skills yet to be able to hold them. Moira over here, she does what all kids do. They don't have that kind of constraint that most kids, most kids have impulse control. They want to move their bodies, they want to swing around and jump around. They haven't conditioned themselves to stand still and recognize where their boundaries are, right? They're kids being kids, jumping around everywhere. Technology doesn't necessarily like that. And of course, you can see where she was spinning around and the headset flew off. And that was a whole thing. But also cognitively, kids, younger kids especially, remember this is a time when they're still believing in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. When they think, you know, younger kids especially think Elmo and the TV is real. And so when you put kids into a headset and trying to get them to understand what they're seeing is not real, but their brain's telling them it's real. As adults, we gain a lot of knowledge, our brains develop, and we understand that, what the difference between what we're seeing, even though our brain is still very, very convinced, we still have the knowledge to understand the difference. Kids struggle with that. Kids also get sensory overload, right? So what we think is cool with all the lights and the sounds and the spatial audio and, the movement and the animations, that's cool for us. For kids, it's overwhelming. It can be too much. So sometimes, thinking when we develop for kids, we got to think about, less is often more for them. And then finally, again, just like with the mess we saw with social media, psychosocially, kids are at a different level than adults. Even teenagers are. And when we think about over 50% of the apps on like MetaQuest, right, are social, and kids are just throwing these in and they're jumping into situations. We're putting them kind of in the same situation we did with social media and social media apps. So for a lot of those reasons, we have to be really thoughtful about when we develop for kids. And we did. That was one of the cool things that we got to do. This was published in 2024, so 2025, about a year ago. We worked on it forever, I feel like. And we came up with guidelines just about these thoughts, about when kids should and shouldn't be in headsets, for how long, things to consider about privacy settings and social settings, all of that. So that's my spiel about kids. Moving on, I'm actually going to spend time talking about some of the projects that we've been working on, maybe over the last 8 or 9 years, maybe more so in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, but some that go all the way back, to give you a taste of kind of some of the stuff we've been doing. This is about source monitoring. How can we tell what's real and not real in mixed reality? And I'll have a little bit more time to talk about that in a second. Spatial audio. How do we, when we're thinking about UX UI design for spatial audio, how do we recognize audio in space, both as adults but also as kids. And what does that think about when we're moving more towards devices that are mostly spatial audio, right? We think of AR glasses. What does that mean when we're thinking about designing, and how well can we recognize audio in space, especially when we think about synthesized audio and headphones? VR support groups for kids with cancer. Sci-fi, when we think about bringing ketamine treatments, the psychedelic treatment of ketamine using EEG into real world kind of simulation or filters. Musical instruments that are using a screen-free, but still using hand tracking. Mixed reality that uses our biometrics for art in a multiplayer space. Augmented reality for alcohol harm reduction, vaping prevention, I'll talk about that one in a minute. Infection prevention control in the NICU. A VR experience about grief and loss of a child. And then vaping, we call it physio-vaping, about using biometrics to assess risk in kids, or teens, around the use of nicotine and cannabis. So a lot of stuff we're doing in our lab. But I want to pause for a second and go back to this idea that I mentioned earlier about immersion. And what does it mean to be immersed? And I want you to think about your own, maybe in the last, I don't know, maybe last week or 2 weeks or month or whatever, of a time that you felt really immersed. And I'm not talking about being in a headset. Okay? I think we've taken the term immersion and we've assumed that it means that you have to have some sort of, it has to be digital, right? But to be immersed has been, the idea of immersion has been around forever. And I thought about things that I'd been immersed in lately. Of course, Bad Bunny, right? That was amazing. I was in it. I was in the story, I was in the music, I was in the feels, in the crowd. I was immersed. I was fully in that. This is the third time I've read this, but I had to prepare, right, for the movie coming out next month. That's the one you get to the end and it sticks with you for weeks. If you haven't read it, you really, really need to read it. Andy Weir, love him. Ilya Malini, right? Malini? I want to say it right? Yeah, okay. I don't know. If you haven't checked out what he's doing right now, I spent so much time bawling my eyes out on the plane in my headphones and just watching clips of him on the ice. Amazing. G-Dragon concert. That was one of the best things I've ever been to. All the lights and the music and the crowd, and it was amazing. And then, of course, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, great game. I think I many nights stayed up way too late and I had to get up and go to work in the morning. Fully into that game, in the story, beautiful narrative. So I just question you too. And then of course we get this beautiful snowstorm. This is our backyard, right when we had that amazing, beautiful snowstorm. So I know that you guys have had these moments where you've just been immersed, right? You've felt fully immersed in a book or a movie or a song or an experience. And I think that's just important to remember, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But we often think about, like I said, when we think about immersion, we're thinking visual, right? Written descriptions, reading a book, 2D non-interactive, we're looking at paintings, we're watching movies. Then we are moving into headsets. We've got, we can look around, and now we can also look around and move around in space, and then we can move more into MR, where we're actually interacting with our environment, right, at the same time. So we've got all these different ways that we think about immersion and what's being immersive. And the same way with audio. You can be immersed in an amazing conversation with a friend, where the time just goes by, or a really great storyteller where you can actually see it in your head, right? We got all these oral histories have been around. I mean, forever. That's how we pass stories along. A great narrative, we think about audio sources, we think stereo, and then we move into spatial audio and ambisonic audio, and then we move again those into headsets or into other immersive experiences. So there's so many ways that we can kind of push and think about immersion. And I didn't even include here, I only focused on visual and audio, but when we integrate haptics, and we think about, and I'm not just talking about little buzzes here and there, I'm talking about heat and cold and pressure, right? There's so many other ways that we can help increase immersion. But it kind of pulls me back to this idea of, we've been focused on VR headsets, right? And when we think about immersion, I think that the VR headsets came out and we're like, okay, that's what immersion is. You have to be fully surrounded. But the reality is right, like we're shifting away. We're thinking about other things, as we do, because that's what technology does. And this actually isn't new. This is from last year, which I think is funny, because it keeps feeling like VR is dying, right? And then, of course, where we all know with not even just the Ray-Ban, but all like AR glasses that are just hitting the market, right? So we are seeing this shift, and I think it's an important time to rethink about what we think about immersion, and where we're putting our efforts in. And I also like this because VR is dead again, right? And I'm not saying it's dead, because I think it does have its purposes, right? And especially when you think like clinical or some of the work we do, it has its place. And I think it will always have its place. But as things shift, it forces us to think outside of the headset, and that's an okay thing to do. So when I first got into the VR space, so I've been making serious games, game development, game research since about 2009. And I remember going to Game Developers Conference in 2016, I think it was, 2015 or 2016. And I got into one of the little Oculus parties, and it was, you had the, and it was huge, and it was wired, and I remember it was a horrible experience. Zombies were chasing you, and it was a cool experience, right? And it was a game. It was all about games at that moment, and it was really cool to experience VR for the first time there. I don't even think that was the first time. But that was like one of the most memorable times. And I remember thinking, that's cool. Think of all the things we can do for health. And I kept thinking about all the work that we'd done in serious games before, right? Where you make games, mostly what I'd been doing around behavior change, kids, around vaping prevention, alcohol harm reduction, bystander intervention, all these things where we make games, often web-based, app-based games. Kids play it through, they click through, like any game, right? And we're hoping that they learn something, or that they're engaged and more likely to practice skills. And I was just fascinated with the idea of like, what if we took that and brought it into VR, where you're actually like getting to use your own voice, and you're able to practice skills and look and have avatars look at you and respond back and forth, and what a great way to engage kids in a different way, to get them to maybe make that content a little stickier, especially when it comes to kids. We can talk to them all we want, but they have to make the choices, right? They have to get in there and they have to practice. They have to practice saying no. They have to see what happens when they make the poor choices, and it's safe because they're in VR or in a game. It's all safe. So anyway, I remember after that meeting in Oculus, I reached out and I was like, I want to do I want to bring this into schools. I want to do a game around vaping prevention. And that's what was hot at the time. And we knew that would be easier to get into schools than like sex ed, which was really what I wanted to do, but they wouldn't let me. Makes sense now. So we did this. In 2017, 2018, we spent time, we built this 2.5-hour VR game, brought it into schools, about 300 kids. Amazing. We had, I think maybe we had one kid that dropped out, and it was because they didn't like missing gym class. Which again, don't do studies during kids' PE classes. This is another lesson we learned. But it was a great experience, and it was powerful, and it worked. Like kids were in it. But the problem that we kept finding was trying to get schools to adopt it, trying to help teachers get educated on how to use it. All the problems that you guys know about and have seen, right? And that's okay. I mean, that's what we learn, right? We do these things in research because we want to learn. And it's still a problem. It was a problem back in 2018, 2019. It's still a problem now, right? And I think that's one of the main reasons why we've kind of pulled away from bringing VR into schools, because it is magical in a lot of ways, but the infrastructure is just not there. And instead of trying to swim upstream about that, I think we're trying to think of other ways that we can bring in immersive tech. So this is us bringing it into kids, and the Oculus Go, which was a fantastic headset, by the way, for schools. The problem is when you do research, like you're expected to apply for NIH grants, right? That's I don't know, it's how they determine your worth and value at Yale especially. And it took many years applying over and over, saying, I got this cool idea, give me money to do this in a bigger way so I can learn more, right? 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, kept applying and applying. I think we applied 5 times before the NIH. Just last year was like, awesome idea. Let's do this for 5 years. Let's take your game and bring it to 1,300 kids across Connecticut and Massachusetts, and with a focus on implementation. And it's mostly because the NIH wants you to be innovative, but not too innovative, right? And people they were not understanding what VR was. I'm gonna do this because it's what you do, but I kind of already know where the story is going, right? In 5 years, where we are going to be with MetaQuest 3 and a game in VR, but we're still going to learn a lot. So this game won't die. This project won't die. But it's great fun. I love doing it. Another project in our lab that this was a multi-year project called the Cutie. It was funded by the CDC. Notice it was, because this is before the CDC decided that we didn't need to teach people about germs, and so we lost our funding here. We also lost our funding about teaching young people around mRNA vaccines, that they don't change your DNA, and we lost that funding too, because apparently we don't need to learn about vaccinations, mRNA, or germs. Anyway, but in the time being, we still made something cool. This is called the Cutie. The idea is that it's for NICU parents, and what we had learned through a lot of focus groups, a lot of user-centered design approach, talking to parents in NICU and staff and nurses, we thought the CDC is like, we want something in VR about teaching parents how to wash their hands, because there's infection rates in the NICU are bad, and they're also very, very dangerous for tiny babies, right? One little tiny germs are very dangerous for babies. And we're like, sure, but we're like, do they really need to know how to wash their hands? They don't. Actually, people are really good about knowing how to wash their hands. The problem is, parents get their tiny little baby, they wash their hands, they put that little tiny baby on their, it's like here, and then they get in their pocket and they pull out their phone to take pictures. And then they touch their baby, right? So it was really about learning how do you take care, like how germs spread in a very kind of basic way, and why we absentmindedly shouldn't just touch our phones as much and then touch babies. So it was a lot of fun. What the whole premise behind the game, because we don't want to put parents in a simulated NICU setting taking care of a baby, right, to keep it alive. That's a horrible idea. It's a fun game around keeping this little creature alive we call it the Cutie. It magically appeared from space or wherever. It's a little alien, little creature. It's very sensitive to the Earth's environment. You are the social media influencer. Your job is to take care of the Cutie, keep people that keep wanting to come in and touch the Cutie or take pictures or bring it gifts or trying to get kind of those extra pictures, for their social media likes. So your goal is to protect the Cutie while also making sure you're taking a lot of pictures. And do you know why? Is it making sense why we had you as a social influence? Because you're touching a phone, right? A tablet all the time. Because we wanted to to replicate that idea of using your phone a lot in the ports of germs, how germs spread. So I won't play too much of it. This is actually an earlier iteration of this. So you have to keep all the toys clean, because they always have germs, and you're a lot of disinfecting and hand washing. Your hands are clean, then you're gonna give the Cutie a little toy. you're gonna take a picture, and it's gonna get uploaded, and you're gonna get some likes. And then characters will come in, and you have to tell them no, or tell them to wash their hands. Also, the point behind this too is, you can see where the germs are spreading here. We also had learned very quickly that parents didn't feel they had the confidence or ability to say to like a physical therapist, occupational therapist, nurse, doctor, anybody coming in to say, did you wash your hands? Because of the power differentiation. So we were trying very hard here to allow parents to practice that skill of just asking, did you wash your hands? Also to grandma, right, who thinks germs are good for your baby. Another example here, this is a project I've been working on for about the last 3 years. We just finished it. It's in VR. It's a great way that we think about narrative. When you want to tell a story, VR is great because we can integrate a lot of those things we were talking about spatial audio, ambisonic audio. We can do so much to tell a story. I will have to say it's hard to get people to hear the story if you don't have a headset, right? Another one of those barriers, but the medium was perfect for what it was. This is called Year of the Cicadas. It's a personal story about the loss of my son. My son died in 2004 when he was 6. I've said this a million times and I still get choked up. But and when he had died, the cicadas head came out of the graveyard, and 17-year cicadas, I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that, but they're the loudest insect on earth, and it's powerful. It was overwhelming. And so I had spent the 8 weeks with them right after when Cody had died, and they had came out of the grave. And then they returned in 2020, I gotta do my math, 2021, they returned 17 years later, and I went back to the grave to revisit that. So it's about grief and loss and parental bereavement and what that looks like over time. And this is just a little trailer for it.
It was eerie and unworldly and perfectly fitting. Their song made my bones vibrate and my brain numb. Each year, just when it feels like the rest of the world has forgotten about my little boy, he becomes alive again on my Christmas tree. I haven't forgotten, you see. I never will.
So as I told you, we're all over the place in our lab. That was a special, thank you. See, now I'm really gonna get choked up. That one's, but again, it's that idea, VR was perfect for this, and I still believe it's the perfect medium, but my heart is breaking because it's very hard to share out in the world, because you have to have a headset, right? I can't just, there's no way to let anybody else, really, because it's interactive, so watching a video really doesn't do it. So some of the other stuff, so like I was mentioning, so we are doing stuff in VR, and it's immersive and it's wonderful, and I'm not saying that VR is not a great vehicle for immersion, right? But some of the other things that we've been doing, and we kind of shift with the flow, as we kind of have to with tech, right? Tech moves fast and research moves slow. So why not get on board? So we're on board. One of the things that we were interested in, and some of the basic science that we were doing, we call this Papa Bubble. And what you'll see here, this is Jake, and my daughter Bree actually was a participant, she was the one singing before in the video too. So the idea is that we're under an OptiTrack. We have a huge OptiTrack system, motion capture system, and the idea is that Jake is going around with a little speaker, and that speaker, you can barely hear it. It's making a certain sound. It kind of said, whoo, whoo, whoo. And Bree has to, she's blindfolded, she has to kind of point very quickly to where she thinks that sound is coming from, right? And then we do this again, and we put headphones, synthesized audio, where the sounds, again, are located in space, because we can track it under the object track, and she's needing to point to where she's hearing these sounds. So you're like, what is the value of this? Well, one of the cool things that we've learned from this is that, what we call your azimuth is here, right, this center part here. When we hear certain higher pitched frequencies, especially, no matter where, if they're down low, we overestimate and think they're higher, because we can't see, right? We're just listening. So what we're seeing is, like, sounds that are down low, people have a hard time identifying. Why do you think that we're better at things up higher? Anybody want to take a guess? Like, what kind of sounds would you might likely hear from up above? Or, yes, or birds, right? It's just the way our brains are tuned. If we hear certain pitches, we tend to look up. And so our brain also tends to point higher. And then with the synthesized audio, we do pretty well. We don't do as well as we do with our normal hearing, obviously, but we do pretty well with synthesized audio. That's great. That's telling us that when you're putting on a headset and you've got spatial, headphones with spatial audio, it can do a really good job of creating that same sense of audio in space. But it tells us when we're thinking about spatial audio, when we're thinking about designing for experiences without, when we're thinking about that screen-free visions, right, that maybe we don't put sounds too low, especially if it's in a UX UI where you're wanting people to identify sounds in space for some reason or interact with sounds below. You're going to have a hard time. And even here, we tend to put UX UI, we think about buttons here. Maybe they need to be here, right? So it's just some kind of really interesting thing. Our next step is to move this into children so we can better understand how kids navigate spatial audio. Are they just as good as adults? Are they better? Another cool thing that we're doing around kind of our basic research it's called source monitoring. And what it is, so we have the Apple Vision Pro, and we have these hyper-realistic images, and then we have real objects. We had her put it in front of her hand so you could see that it was digital, because they're actually quite realistic when you're looking at them. And we had people come in and identify, and is that cantaloupe real or is it digital, right? And they would say it's real, and then we say, well, why? And they're like, well, I can see it, I can smell the cantaloupe, right? It's casting a shadow. That's how I know it's real. And then we have them come back in a week, and we ask, was that cantaloupe you saw, do you remember, was it real or virtual? And then they were like, oh, it was digital, or it was real, and then we have them explain why. Mostly what we're trying to understand is how well our brains in terms of memory creation when it comes to mixed reality, because things are moving more towards mixed reality, right? We are going to be seeing very, very realistic objects in our real space. And what does that do in terms of our memory? The good news is that we tend to remember real objects better than digital. So even as realistic as they are, our brain defaults. If we can't remember if we saw it real or not real, we tend to say it must have been digital, right? If our memory seems to be failing us, we assume it's digital. Why we're interested in this with adults is mostly because we're thinking about kids. And remember when I talked before about kids and concrete thinking, abstract thinking, have a difficulty between reality and what's not real, right? I mean, everything's kind of real to kids. But does that say when we're designing for kids, should we think about having shaders on digital objects if they're in a mixed reality space, or maybe a heavy line around them, or because we can create false memories with kids very easily in VR and MR. So it's just really kind of letting us understand more about source monitoring and memory. Another example here that we've done, which is kind of cool and fun and weird, we call it the SCOT. It's the screenless optical theremin with tremolo. It's a mouthful, but I'll show you what it is. This is just in our lab, just goofing off. Basically what it is, MetaQuest 3 without the screen. So it still has the hand tracking, still has the spatial audio, still has all the same effects, but just you don't have the screen. And the reason is because we're trying to think about screen-free applications. What can we build when we don't have a screen? How can we create immersion or immersive experiences if you take a screen away and you still have the body tracking, hand tracking, a lot of the other functions? So basically, it's a musical instrument. Michael has created a musical instrument. There, he's really getting into it. There you go. That's probably a better example. You can control the pitch and the tone and the sound. And he composed some great music for us. So again, we do a lot of things in our lab, and they may seem like disconnected, but in many ways they are very connected, right, with the ultimate goal of we thinking about screen-free interfaces. And again, that, you know, the AR glasses are very timely, but our initial thoughts on some of this work is just about how can we bring immersive tech to kids without putting a big heavy device with a screen that's close to their eyes? How can we still get them engaged in immersive ways when we think clinically, when we think, you know, just playful or out in the world? How can we bring immersive tech to them that doesn't have to have a screen? Another one that we've been working on, it's called Sci-Fi. Now it's got a new name, Myatra. You're not going to find anything if you look it up, so don't worry. It's still like in early development. We have this idea. We've been working with the folks in the interventional psychiatry group that does ketamine at Yale. And you know, when you've guys all seen the psychedelic experiences, when they tend to always look like this, right? With the whirly, swirly, you're in space and makes you feel, you know, just makes you feel all happy. But we were really interested to see if you could use the cameras, get access to the cameras on the Apple Vision Pro, and actually change the filters in the world in real time, right? So I can look out here and maybe the walls will breathe, and maybe the colors will be saturated, maybe my audio will be a little bit off, right? Or I can use that MR and put things, make the clock speed up or slow down, or whatever I want to do. And maybe we can create a different type of ketamine experience. And again, this is all for clinical reasons, right? This is a very, very early version of this. This is our lab, as you can remember from the early pictures. This is kind of on the high end of the effects. We tend not to have it this heavy. This is one of our early just practicing with it. But the cool thing is that we actually have something that we have brought into the clinical setting. We have tons and tons of data around what your brainwave looks like on ketamine. So we know what it looks like. So we can put people in the experience and strap them into some EEG and get some more data. And what we're actually finding is that we can create very similar waves, these kind of fast waves, that we know ketamine induces, which is associated with antidepressant effects. So in some ways, are we being able to create the effect of ketamine without the drug, right? Very early, but it's a really cool idea, and we're actually seeing some really compelling data. Again, it's just a great way to use the technology for in a clinical way. And again, you're like, well, what does that have to do with kids? We can't get, you know, we work with kids with cancer. We work with kids that are at in palliative care, end of life care, right? And some of the greatest drugs you can do, or things you can do for adults with cancer dying at end of life, palliative care, is give them ketamine, give them psychedelics. It really reduces fear of death. It can actually create like this really kind of an experience of seeing yourself as in a bigger picture, right? Kind of that in terms of my place in the world. We can't give drugs to kids. We can't give ketamine to kids. So maybe in other ways we might be able to do that. This was actually kind of our main goal, was seeing how we could use non-pharmaceutical ways of inducing the effects of ketamine. And we just thought it would be fun too. So I want to be very thoughtful on my time here. I'll quickly go through this. One of the things that we are also interested in our lab is talking about the use of physiological data or biometrics. in using it real time, this idea is not new, right? There's a lot of amazing games out there right now, especially for kids, that are using physiological feedback and data in real time to change gameplay and progression in games, right? And it's really great for kids with anxiety, trying to help them in real time practice skills, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT skills to reduce their anxiety in real time. And we can see that when they do it in a game, and that game can adapt to where they are with using that psychological or the physiological data, the feedback, right? I think it's fascinating. I think it's definitely a place for going. While I'm here, I'm really excited. Nobody's really excited about it, but I still want to try it. The Ray-Ban display with the wearable, right? Because I want to try to understand. I know you can't. The problem is, I know you can't. Just like the Apple Watch, you can't tap into your own data that way. But I'm still really interested because I really think that's one use case or way that we're going to be able to create experiences that are actually using our own heart rate and skin conductance and breathing, right, to help us in real time, so we can practice those skills we learn in therapy when you're doing okay, right? Because when you really need them is when you're out in the world and your heart rate's pounding and you've forgotten what you need to do. I think that's a great use case for that. And so one of the things that we're doing is we call it physio vaping. So building off the invite-only VR vaping prevention game, I had this idea of like, what if we can, the problem when we create interventions for kids is you have to make it universal, right? In the sense of if it's a one fit, you have to make it universal. So it's getting to the kids that have no intentions of vaping. They have no interest, no intentions, they're never gonna use it, which is most kids, right? And then you got these kids in the middle that haven't started vaping yet, but are really thinking about it. Or they're like, well, I'd try it. If my friend offered, I'd probably try it. Or, I'm not worried about getting addicted because I just quit before the end of school anyway. So you have those kids in the middle, and then you have these other kids, we call them tier 3, who are already showing signs of addiction or are already addicted to nicotine. And they need a whole other kind of intervention. So it's always difficult when we make universal interventions for kids because they're all over the place. So the idea of what if we could have kids play before they play, and we can gather this kind of physiological data using eye tracking, visual cues, right, in an environment, heart rate, skin conductance, to see how they're reacting to social situations around vaping, where their eyes are tracking. Are they getting excited or interested in vaping products or conversations around it? And if so, can we take that and this is where that AI can come in swiftly and kind of put kids into that tier of where their intervention needs to be and tailor that content. Still very early work. This is where we are right now. We're getting ready to start this actually next week. So onward, everybody's talking about the AR glasses, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I think, and this is really a call to students especially. There's kind of two messages. Don't be scared to get creative and do the weird stuff. Make the weird musical instrument, right? Do whatever you can think of creatively with these glasses. If it's in VR, do something crazy and weird in VR. Make some weird controllers, right? Think outside of the box. This is the perfect time for you to be weird because nobody is having to pay you. It's not a project that is funded that you have to get paid for. Do the weird stuff, explore. It all goes into a bucket of helping us explore and understand technology, immersive tech for the future. And I believe, because I do agree with Bruce Vaughn in this, of like, when he said yesterday about this is a long haul. You got to think 5-10 years out. Everything you're doing now, it is putting into that bucket of helping us to create greater things later with better technology. But we might as well have fun right now. So, have fun with it. Don't create the thing that everybody else is doing. Get weird. Try to get into the back end as much as you can. Don't, use other things. Build things. You've got 3D printers. I mean, there's so much you can do. Have fun with it, because it all adds to that bucket. So I come back to this idea again. What is immersive? What is immersive to you? What does immersion mean? Think about that when you're creating. And that was the other thing that stuck with me with respond to always be creating. You'll get busy and busy, and things will become very programmatic or process-oriented. You'll start leading teams, and you'll step away from the creative part. Go back to that and remember that kind of core stuff that we talked about. What is immersion? What does that mean? It doesn't have to be within a headset, and it doesn't have to take out your vision, right? There's so many other things we want to think about. So thank you.
Hey, I teach in a K-12 school, and so we've had those conversations about what's our lowest age level, what's our cutoff, and you referenced some research you were doing. Do you have a standard down there of where we shouldn't go below?
Yes. Yeah, generally we say under 7, don't put kids in headsets, mostly because they're IPD, like the distance between their eyes is too small. Like they can't even visually, they're not even probably seeing it correctly. But it's, unless it's in a clinical setting or for a reason like pain distraction, those are great reasons. But generally, we recommend not putting kids under 7. 7 to 11, we say 10, 15 minutes at a time. Okay. Again, making sure that your parents or teachers are very cognizant of what kids are interacting with. Keep it less, often more for this age group. No connections to social apps, we say, at all, just for kids' protections, and think about the privacy settings. So it's highly monitored. 13, or when we think about like 12 to 17, when you got teens, still monitored because that's our responsibility as adults. And be checking, always checking, and use those parental guidelines, the settings there. You can extend the time more there, but still always think about those breaks for kids. 20 minutes max, give them a 5-10 minute break in between, because it strains your eyes, it just does. So young kids, we don't want kids getting headsets in school. So that's what we recommend. Yeah.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.